Great evening to you, my people. It is serious times that we are in right now. There's no two ways about that. And I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of fear in the atmosphere. And I'm just curious about, how people are looking after yourselves. How are you maintaining your sanity in the face of so much adversity? If you have any questions or you'd like tips about how to look after yourself, please do let me know, because it's no joke out there. It seriously is no joke. Hey, Tasha, welcome. So if you've got any questions about how best to look after yourself out at this particular time, then do let me know, because it is most definitely, hey Tish, very, very difficult times. I'm here tonight. I'm happy to take any questions that you have about your intimate relationships, any challenges that you're facing at the current time. One of the areas of interest that I've had is always about how are we looking after ourselves when we still have feelings for an ex, when we know that it won't work, the relationship can't work, but our feelings still pervade. I think this is a particular area that I'm interested in because it comes up an awful lot in therapy. And what my coach and I have started to work on is for me to start to pull out these themes that keep impacting on people, and to start to talk live to people about, these challenges, because they can be really big for us. And actually, it's absolutely appropriate to have feelings for somebody. It's absolutely okay. But what we choose to do about it, especially if that relationship is not beneficial to us, especially if it's toxic or we're just left with regret, is the most important aspect. What we choose to do about our feelings is what we really need to pay attention to, because that takes us into the real crux of the matter, which is about actions. And it's a bit like with all the fear going on right now. Hey, Leslie. Okay, thank you for the love. With all the fear out there right now, if you buy into it, that means it's highly likely you'll feel panicked. And that then we know when we're panicked that our decision-making process is compromised, which is what we're seeing right now. You're seeing lots of panic buying and people hoarding and the selfishness that is going on out there. So in terms of how can you keep your equilibrium so that you make wise choices? So that's something I'm always going to be encouraging people to think about, whether it's related to this particular COVID-19. Is it COVID-19? COVID-19 is the name in my head. So, or it's about your own situation. What power can you take back for yourself? Because the reality is, if we lose all of our power, we will become disempowered. And when we're disempowered, we don't feel like we have any choices. Big up the fat bitch diabetes. Okay, there you go. So when we feel disempowered, disempowerment leads to things like anxiety and depression. Now, we know anxiety and depression are not helpful for us being our optimal self. So how can you regain your control? How can you regain power? And for me, I'm an advocate of choice. What do we do? What can we do in adverse situations? And one of the reasons in my private practice, I specialize in helping people who have intimate relationship challenges. But as I don't know, maybe you know or you don't know, but I've also been a probation officer where I worked in prisons. And so I help people from a whole remit, with a whole remit of challenges. But fundamentally, whatever situation there is, my people, if you negate that you have choice, you will end up feeling like a victim. And being a victim is not good for our greatness. Now, that doesn't mean we haven't been victims in our past or people haven't wronged us. Yes, but we then can choose whether we stay a victim. And what I know about victimhood is victimhood becoming depressed and anxious. I see a very close relationship with that. Sometimes we hold on to bad feelings, and years later, we're still singing the same song. Give me a heart or a like out there, somebody, if this makes sense to you. We're still preaching the sad, sad love song later on, and actually, it's us that haven't moved on. Sometimes the people who have inflicted pain upon us, they're already doing whatever they're doing, living their #best life, yet we're still singing that same old love song. That's Tony Braxton's song. Waxing lyrical about how they done us wrong. So if you've got any questions around that, if you're curious about how you can move on from your situation, then I would gladly take your questions, because it's all good and well for me thinking I could create products, I could create services for people to assist people. But what I've realized is, because I'm so entrenched in what I do, I can miss what's going on for the people. And so it's really important. Hi, Margate Pirate. I don't know how to say these names, because some of the names, they just don't just flow so, but yes, Pirate. If you've got any questions, Pirate, about love, relationships, or even let's just make it relevant to the kind of culture at the moment of fear that's going on out there and how best we can empower ourselves, I would love to take your questions. Because like I said, I'm very much in the trenches. This is the work that I do every single day. However, it is not wise for me to think that I know exactly what's best for people. It's best for me to check out what are people's pain points, what is holding you back. And let me think about some of the things that I spoke about this last week, but most definitely it was the fantasies that I had in my mind's eye about how relationships should be, that kept me holding on. So in my mind's eye, I felt like this was the fantasy, this was the hopes I had for a relationship. And when reality sent me a different message, I ignored that, because that was not in keeping with the fantasy that I had in my mind's eye for that relationship. So here we go. What are the best methods in lowering the high barriers that you've built through past trauma? Well, if we've been traumatized in our past relationships, then what is highly likely to happen is that we've built up a fortress around our vulnerability. And I can wholeheartedly understand and get that. When we build a fortress, we can reject people, we find fault with people, we will hone in on some problem and magnify it in order to reject people. And that's something that I've worked on with my own therapist to kind of get a handle on, that actually what may often happen is I find a way to reject people, like, oh, they're too nice, he's boring, he's this, he's that, the other. And so that it used to sound justifiable to me, but actually underneath, it's about me trying to push people away. And I think if your fortress, well, what will happen is, if we build a fortress, is that it will keep love out, it will keep people away from you, but it also ends up isolating you. And then you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable again. And vulnerability is key in any intimate relationship. So Tasha, if that means that our vulnerability is no longer available, and so if you want to begin to break that down, I think one of the ways that we can do that is to build friendships with potential love interests, so that we go slow and we build friendships. And I'm a massive fan of being vulnerable, but then, to a certain degree, being vulnerable with somebody, but then noticing how they regard that. Does that make sense? So, sometimes being vulnerable might even be able to say, it would be good to see you today. So, and that makes you vulnerable, because obviously that person could say no. And then what happens when they say no is we feel rejected. However, your power lies, I believe, in being mindful and giving away your vulnerability in order to see how that person responds. So there's two things that can happen when we've been hurt before. Is one, we build that fortress and we don't let anybody in, but we can also reject people because we find fault. In addition, we may also go for our type, and sometimes actually our type are not helpful for us. And so there may be a benefit to being open to exploring something that you've never, a type, somebody, different people, and then notice what you notice. Often, as I said before, what will happen is if you are determined on not being vulnerable again, you'll find a way to reject that person. And that can be elaborate. And if you're not woke, you'll believe the things you say to yourself, well, they're this, they're boring, they're dry, not exciting. And actually, it's masking something far deeper. And the real deeper challenge is actually your desire to not be vulnerable with somebody. And that is not healthy for us. I don't believe so, because you become guarded. And actually, really and truly, if our fortress has been built up so high, it means that the legacy of what Bob did to us in the 80s, 90s or whatever is still living on. So actually it means that we are still giving that person our energy because we're sabotaging future relationships. And I guess you have to ask yourself is, do you want that person to have such power over your life? That's for you to sit and answer. And that is a very empowering question. Sometimes we ask ourselves disempowering questions, which is like, why me? How could they do that to me? That's not a very good use of our energy. Empowering questions are questions like, one, what's the benefit of me being stuck? Decent questions to ask. So I hope that's helpful, and I would appreciate any other questions that anybody has about relationships. Moving on, Tish Tash 81, let me know if that has been helpful to you. Let me know if that's been helpful to you. Let me know if that's been helpful to you. So those are my viewpoints about dealing with difficult situations and how best we start to move on, because do we want a situation where 5 years later we're still stuck because of whatever happened to us back then? So I guess you have to make a choice about that. And I'm not saying it's easy, but what I do know is vulnerability is the key. Vulnerability is the key. And so, as I said before, I think I say it in my book, Why Love Hurts, is if you can gift somebody your vulnerability, it's a wonderful opportunity to see how somebody regards that. How does somebody regard that? If someone takes the piss, then you are getting a wealth of insights. You're getting a wealth of insights into that person, and then you're able to gauge. A lot of us, what we do is we give other people the power, because we'll say to them, oh, well, I did this, and then we're waiting for them to give us their answers before we decide. You need to decide that actually I've gifted you my vulnerability and you're taking the pee. And then we need to, then we need to make a decision about that. We need to make a decision about that. That's so helpful. I would never even have thought of that. Friendship first. Yeah, friendship first is fundamental, because what being friends with individuals is showing me is that you are getting the measure of the individual as you journey. Getting a measure of an individual as you journey before intimacy, before attachment, before a bond is created, a sexual bond, because we also know that can be particularly unhelpful for us, is that you're getting the measure of somebody and you're having a relationship. We often talk about relationships, intimate relationships, as if that's the only kind of relationship. Every single relationship you have is a relationship. So you're always getting access to yourself. through relationships. So pay attention, like befriend somebody, be friends, and cull your desire to move on particularly quickly. Like become friends, build a relationship, and then notice what you notice what develops, because then you're also, I don't know if you do this, I don't know if lots of people do it, or I do it because I'm a therapist, but I also observe myself in situations. So when you can observe yourself in situations, you get a wealth of insight back about yourself. So if your natural reactions, you know, I can be incredibly spontaneous, I can be incredibly open to opportunities. What's another trait I would say? Well, let's just say being spontaneous. That has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks. And so we need to be very careful of sometimes going against ourselves. So being that I'm spontaneous, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take things slow to go against my grain. That way I get to see and understand and experience more of an individual than I would if I would have just gone with my feelings and been spontaneous. So I hope that's helpful to you. That's so helpful. I've never even thought of that. Friendship, yeah, man, friendship is very important. So your girl's key is here. I am taking your questions about moving on from difficult intimate relationships. We've had a question tonight about how do we lower our barriers. And I guess the challenge is, and we're not really taught this stuff, which is why I'm very passionate about having this conversation, is that, you know, without vulnerability, we can't love, I believe. Unless you're wired in a particular way where actually, you know, you don't necessarily do feelings. But if you do, but I would say for, well, maybe my empath crew, because lots of my clients are definitely empaths, it's not that easy to be that cutthroat. So being vulnerable is essential to love, because we know at any particular point someone can change their mind, and that is vulnerability. But if we lose our capacity to be vulnerable, I think we become very stone, very hard, sometimes bitter, sometimes full of resentment as well. We go against our own essence. That's my view. If you agree, let me know. Here we go, another question. It's so hard to practice impulse control when you're excited about meeting a new person. What's the best way of dealing with poor impulse control? I think, you see, I wouldn't ever call it a poor impulse control, because as a therapist and someone who's, you know, I've studied psychology as well, and I've done a personality test. So I think I'm going to put a link here to a personality test that I would definitely encourage people to think about. But I think the real challenge is it's not a deficit. Like being spontaneous and open to opportunities is a great quality. But we also need to know that actually in some situation it works against me. So it's about knowing, Margate Pirate, that in certain situations, that way of being is not good for you. It's knowing that in certain situations, give me a heart, give me a like, let me know if what I'm saying is chiming with you, that actually it's not beneficial for you to be impulsive. And that's where we have to start to practice. You see, that's where we have to start to practice some new behaviors. And what you're going to meet is your own resistance. You're going to meet your own resistance. So it's not that it's a bad impulse control. It's not that. It's just that actually in certain situations, because if you've been like me, you will sometimes know backwards that was a difficult, like, you know what, there were red flags the whole time, but we just ignored them because we were going at breakneck speed all the way in. And it's only after that because we slowed, because after, well, either we usually hit the buffers and then we have to stop because for whatever reason that relationship has just crashed. And then we can get into the process of thinking and reflecting and putting bits of the puzzle together. That can be particularly difficult, and, you know, especially for my empath crew, it can be very hard because we love wholeheartedly, right? I don't know about you, but I'm all in. I'm all in, and that is absolutely, I think there's nothing like that, you know. Oh, you're the queen of hindsight. Give me a high five there. I know that. I got tired of it. I got tired of being the queen. Oh, I love that. The queen of hindsight. Yes, that can be particularly tiring because woulda, shoulda, coulda, and then you might be full of regret. Then you start to see things that you didn't. One of the benefits for myself in terms of like becoming friends first is that it's a bit, you know how I liken it to? I remember one time I was going to the gym and I was reverse parking. When I reverse park and I'm doing it with speed, I mash up the curb, I hit the rims on the car because it's too fast. Reverse parking going fast is not for me. When I reverse park and I take my time and I go slowly, I can see the curb, you know, like how you drive an instructor taught you, I can see the curb coming in and then I turn away. I don't hit the curb, I don't hit the rims. And I liken that reverse parking to intimate relationships. When I'm going 101 miles an hour, you just cannot see. It's just too quick. And that's where accidents happen. Accidents happen. And accidents in intimate, loving relationships are very difficult. If you're anything like myself, this used to take me ages to get over. Anybody here, like sometimes you just take years, like you just harbor it or you hold on to it. The benefit of going slowly is you are actually breaking in new behavior. Thank you. Yeah, man. Next time you reverse parking, I want you to text me and be like, you know what, Key? That's it. That is the benefit of going slowly, is that you get to see the dangers. And now, as someone who, I respect my impulsivity, I respect that I have that nature, but I am not a victim to it. I can give it permission in certain circumstances, in certain situation, I allow that to be. But I also know that it's not always helpful. So then after those situations, I'll be very reflective and then I'll want to take my time to understand somebody, getting to learn them. But as I'm getting to learn somebody, remember, the more slower we can get, we're also getting to know ourselves. What are we learning about ourselves? What are we experiencing about us in relation to that problem? And what I have benefited from in terms of going slowly is that actually you can start to ask questions earlier. You can start to see the anomalies a lot earlier. And then you can have a dialogue with that person about, I've noticed when you said X, but you did Z. Yeah? Because noticing anomalies between what somebody says and what they do is particularly important. Don't listen. Well, we listen to what somebody says, but most importantly is we need to pay attention to what somebody does. And when we're going at 101 miles an hour, we don't get that opportunity. And that's one of the benefits of slowing down, is that we can then see things a little bit more clearly and ask in the present, in the here and now. So Margate Pirate, I hope that may have been a benefit to you. We explore these situations in my Pain into Purpose course, where what we're looking at is, because what I realize is that depression is often, we've had pain, but the pain isn't channeled into something productive. So when we're just depressed and that depression has not been channeled into something productive, then where does the energy go? Remember, my peeps, everything is energy. And if you're not on that flow, if you miss that, then your doctors ain't going to be telling you this, because they deal with the medical model. That's one of the reasons why they're going to be asking you to pop some pills. But if you realize that everything is energy, the true question is, how can you make that energy purposeful so that we don't have all that sadness blocked up and locked up inside of us? So your girl Key is here. I'm happy to take your questions about your intimate relationships, how to move on, the challenges of moving on, feeling stuck, having feelings for somebody, yet going round in vicious cycles, or meeting somebody. Some of the things we've touched on tonight is about how do we lower our barriers so we are able to love again. And I touched on the fact that sometimes we create a psychological fortress, a fortress, and we expect some sort of Shrek to come and rescue us. It doesn't work like that. We got to learn to be our own best friend, and we save ourselves. The fundamental key is, if we want to love again, how do we become vulnerable? How do you become vulnerable? You know, I think that's definitely the key. And the challenge is, if we're being guarded and our beauty is trapped behind this high brick wall, then really the truth is that the legacy of what somebody's done to us lives on. And I don't know if you want somebody having that kind of power over you. I know I don't. I don't want anyone having that kind of power over me again. So I'm here, it's your girl Key. I'm taking your questions, anything to do with love, intimate relationships, moving on, feeling stuck. Sometimes we go back to the dick that we know for all the people that are on that. And that can be very difficult as well. If you've got a sexual tie to somebody, it can be very difficult, because that can often, I don't know if anybody else out there can identify with that. Give me a like, give me a heart if that speaks to you. But then if we are a victim to our sexual need for somebody, when we know that the relationship, hi Fifi La Rock is joined us. What I would say to that is, if we're addicted to the sex, to the dick, to the, then that will compromise. That part of our body can sometimes compromise our logical sense-making decision process. And I had to learn to not be a victim to that myself. And that's one of the benefits of taking time out to stop before we react. Like, how can we pause? Otherwise, we're just going to say yes, yes, yes. We're impulsive. And the next thing you know, we're back in a similar situation. So the majority of people that I work with are empaths. And I find that they benefit from the kind of work that I do, because, you know, we just got a heart to care. We're made that way. We're wired that way. And so we're not really taught how to protect that gift, I believe. I do believe it's definitely a gift. And when we are not taught how to protect that gift, life can get very difficult. Empaths are great at going for their bipolar opposites, which is the narcissist. And if you are not careful, well, we know that can it can decimate our life, and it can have long-lasting consequences. It's a form of, empaths and narcissists complement each other, but we know that the relationship is heavily dependent on the narcissist being able to feed the needs of the empath is going to be giving their energy, all their energy, to the narcissistic individual. And we know that that's not good for our greatness. There is definitely an imbalance. So I would love to I've got another 7 minutes here. Any questions that you may have about love, intimate relationships, feeling stuck and wanting to move on. One of the reasons why I'm very passionate about exploring this subject is because hey Kels, I'm reading and getting there. I don't know if that's my business, but one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about intimate relationships is because this is often linked to mental health problems to some degree. Because if we become depressed and anxious and stressed out, and we know that can lead to burnout, that can lead to us being off of, then it's a serious issue. And I don't see that there is a real conversation about our intimate relationships and how they are impacting on us. If you go to your doctors, you're highly likely often to be given medication, or you might be referred for cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you're put on a wait list, which can work for people. But I think it's really important. Why do empaths attract narcissists? Because everything in the world exists in opposites. Givers need takers. Abusers need people to abuse. It's the yin and the yang of life. Like, there's night, there's day, up, down. As Paula Abdul said in the 80s, opposites attract. So I don't know about you, but before I was a woke empath, I think I had a magnet for narcissists. They were just drawn to me, but I'm also drawn to them. And I think empaths, unwoke empaths, go around thinking that they're often victims. How could they do it to me? How could they do it to me? But often we are the ones picking up the phone and calling the guy, calling the girl, bringing them back into our lives, because often there's a number of factors, and I explore this in the Feel Loved workshop, where we, well, one of the things that we do is we make elaborate justifications for their nonsense. Another thing that we do is we have great hopes and ambitions, and we live in our fantasy about how the relationship should be, and we negate reality. And when reality gives us information that we don't like, we kick back into our fantasy and we live in our fantasy. We live in the hopes of how the relationship should be. And as such, we are not in touch with reality. Fifi LaRock, so when a man and a woman break up, why do you think women who make a choice to have casual sex are frowned upon when the man isn't? Do you think it's possible for a woman to have the same? I think emotional detachment. I think if you decide that you want a sex-based relationship, you need to be woke about that. You need to be very clear with yourself about the fact that this is going to be a one-dimensional relationship. The challenge that so many of us have as women is that we will get attached. You need to be woke about that. So if you want to go and ride the dick and you down with that, you need to be woke with yourself about that, because often what happens is we lose touch with our reality and then things get tricky. So you have to handle that situation like a boss. And, you know, I could write a whole load of tips on that. That for me is very easy. The challenge is, even when you handle it like a boss, there will become pinch points. There become points when it's not working for you, or it will hurt, or you want to level up, or something in your life will kick off. I don't know, say somebody dies, and would you invite that person? Can they support you emotionally? You have to, you know, if you're having a one-way relationship, a one-dimensional relationship, you have to be clear with yourself that you are doing that, because often it's us that catch feelings and then we create the problem for ourselves. So you got to handle that like a G. Yeah, let's call it what it is. You got to handle that like a G. If you just want to ride, cool. But if you need to know that especially if you're an empath, it's highly likely that you will start to care. It's highly likely that you might buy you need to get clear. Do you buy birthday presents or not? Do you buy an Easter egg or not? I don't know. You need to be clear in your own mind's eye. But what you also need to be clear about is when you're slipping, Fifi, because when we slip, we got to get woke. Okay, Fifi, are we just kidding ourselves that we can't turn our feelings off and trust into a no-string situation? Well, you know what? I think in terms of thinking about emotional detachment, I think it's tricky. I think you need to be woke about where you're at in your life. You have to be very clear with yourself first. If you're just going to do one-dimensional relationship, you have to have a certain protocol in your mind's eye, because life happens to all of us. And sometimes you need a shoulder. Is the guy that you're riding, can he give you a shoulder? Or will you expect a shoulder when life's difficult? You know, in my past, sometimes I felt like, you know, if you could put all the different ones together and put them all together, you'd have the perfect guy, but it doesn't. And some gangster girls I know have had men for different reasons. Now, the challenge is you can have men for different reasons. One who's your emotional shoulder, one who's like a mentor, pulls you up, one who looks out for you, one who you might have a sexual relationship with. The challenge is, if we were to speak about this, people will judge women for it. People put them down. So you have to be mindful about how there is a judgment about women having these types of relations. So if you want to be a champion for that, go and tell everybody. But sometimes we just need to walk like a gangster and do what we got to do to fulfill our needs, because it can be very tricky to find that need met in one person. Fifi, inbox me if that makes sense to you. I hope I'm doing myself a service, but I know exactly what I mean. Is sometimes you may benefit from having a range of people around you who service very different needs. And yes, I have that. I definitely do have that, and I feel very privileged to have that. But it's what I've set up in my life, because I'm wise enough to know that one person isn't going to fulfill all of those needs. And so I'm very much open to having very different relationships that service me. People can judge, but as far as I'm concerned, only God can judge me. There you go. I hope that makes sense to you, Fifi. Netty Betty 5. How do you overcome caring for someone who doesn't show they care for you? In the words of Usher Raymond, you gotta let it burn. You gotta let it burn. It is not nice to care for someone and they don't care for you. And in my unwoke years, I used to go on campaign, how can I make them love me? How can I make them care? That is not good for our greatness. It's not good for our wellness. So sometimes we have to let it wither on the vine. The question is, Nettie Betty, in such a situation, is how can you take steps backwards? How can you begin to observe it? What I would encourage you to do is to note down what you notice about yourself. Because, for example, at the moment, I need to meditate every day and I'm not. But what I notice is the stories I tell myself every day. The reason why, or when I get up and I do this. So if you decide to stop contact, which may be beneficial to you, if I was to say to you, block that person's number for whatever reason, notice what your reactions are. So overcoming is about actually sometimes we have to let go. That's called a process of surrender. Yeah, I think it's a slippery road personally, but wanted to know your thoughts. Yeah, one-dimensional, Fifi, one-dimensional relationships can work, but you got to be gangster. You got to be woke. You got to be clear with yourself first. And actually what I've noticed is men find it very intriguing when you as a woman come to them and you let them know the T's and C's. Yeah, you let them know how the show's going to work, because then you're empowered. You're making an empowered choice. So you bring the T's and C's. Often what I notice as an empath is we let other people dictate how the situation's going to roll. And actually, you got to moat so we can use it. Some of us are fearful. I don't know about you, but sometimes we don't meet people that we chime with so often and then we don't want to lose them. And so sometimes we can start in that obedience stuff. That obedient behavior where we give away our power. Not good for our greatness. Not good for our greatness. Okay, action hero teacher. My girl cousin has recently walked away from a toxic family. Well done to her. She was the family doormat, the scapegoat often. She has learnt boundaries, but the family cuss her to us. Is blood thicker than water? I don't know about blood being thicker than water. I'm not sure if your cousin, she has learnt boundaries, but the family cuss her to us. I think family dynamics are family dynamics, and I think you have to be mindful of family dynamics because stuff can turn. And as I say, you know, I've had my fair share of family dynamics, and what I always say is DNA binds us. And so you have a unique relationship with family that, you know, if it was your friend, they wouldn't be your friend, but family is family. And so you're joined in a very different way because of your family, your lineage. I don't know if it's about blood being thicker than water. I think it's far more complex than that. I think the challenge is your cousin needs to go within herself, knowing that she's made the right decision for her own well-being, and that actually that's about turning inwards. That's about becoming self-governing. That's about self-validation, because you have to make yourself redundant. And this is one of the, this is bigger than this. This is bigger because one of the factors that causes people to become depressed is external validation. They want the head nod and the okay from everybody else. When you validate yourself internally, which is something I've worked on over many years to do in therapy, is you no longer need the validation of the external crowd. You validate yourself, you validate your experiences, and as such, other people will then usually have a problem with you. So I don't know if that is helpful in terms of is blood thicker than water. I think what it's about relationship and it's about integrity. And if you're caught in the middle, sometimes we have to put our own boundaries, which is about actually maybe it's not best to talk to me about this because I get caught in the middle. Can she work it out with them, or did she do the right thing to walk away? She says her mum is a narcissist. Listen, if you've got a mother who's a narcissist, it's very, very, very complex, just as it is if you have an intimate relationship with someone. Narcissistic parents, it can be brutal. It can be brutal. And if the child is an empath what they would have learned to do is to be in servitude to the mother. And so they disconnect from their own thoughts and feelings because they are purely sensitive to the needs of that tricky, very difficult parent. So I would assume that it would have taken a lot of courage for that person to get to that point, because severing that type of relationship can be very difficult. And it's very important that it sounds like she's got to a place where she's made the decision. I would encourage you to provide her with support as best you can, in a way where you're, looking after yourself, not caught in the middle. But I would assume that that is a very difficult decision to make and is an act of self-care, because sometimes you have to work out if you can, reduce your contact with a narcissistic parent. And as you try and you notice how they respond, sometimes it can just be very damaging for people. But what I would encourage her to think about is how she can make her pain purposeful. Making your pain purposeful, we all go through pain in life, but making our pain purposeful is one sure way to have victory over your circumstance. So that might mean she sets up a group for other daughters of narcissistic parents. That way your experience becomes beneficial to others, and by virtue of that, you benefit from that too. So it would be about how to make her experience purposeful, her pain purposeful, so we don't lead into that depression. Welcome, welcome. Will do, fully agree. Yeah. Fifi La Rock, let me know about that. I would gladly, I could gladly write an article about that, because it's serious times we're living in, and you can you can get what you want, but you have to be woke sometimes. About that. They tell us she has mental problems. Well, like I said, if you've got a narcissistic parent, remember, people talk about narcissism like it's some joke thing. Narcissism is a personality disorder. Go and look that up, Google that somewhere. It's a personality disorder, so it's no joke thing. Dealing with someone with a personality disorder is a very, very difficult process. As a therapist, narcissists don't tend to come to therapy. I contend with, usually, well, in the main, the empaths, the victims, who have had to deal with what has often just been thrown at them, and they've learned to adjust and adapt to. So, I think it's really important that we are aware that narcissism is a personality disorder. And so, trying to manage that is very tricky, and I have the utmost respect for people who try to or stay in relationships with narcissists, because I don't know how they do it, because they are very tricky people, and I'm a therapist, and it's not something I would endeavor to do to myself. It's very tricky, but not always easy when it's your parent. Very difficult. What I mean is, should I advise to try to work it out? I wouldn't encourage. If you're talking about should you advise your cousin to work it out, no, I wouldn't encourage you to work it out, because it sounds like she's made her own choices. Respect people's decisions, because we do not know somebody's pain, and you don't know what it's taken for that person to get there. So I'd encourage you to support, but not to give advice. It's not, in my view. I would assume that it's been very difficult. Margate Pirate, self-validation is everything. Self-validation, it is, but we can say it so easily, but self-validation is a journey. We don't just get to the point of self-validation. Today I was in the gym, and I listen to 90s dancehall when I'm in the gym, and I'm bubbling in there, man. I've got my sunglasses on, and I'm throwing it up, and I'm having a wonderful time. And that experience teaches me how far I've come in terms of my capacity to be self-validating. I've had years of therapy. I am a therapist, but I also know that people look at me. Sometimes they must think, oh my God, who does she? Like, I don't get into that, because I believe it's a living hell to be worried about what people think about you. So I do me. But like I said, I've journeyed for many years to get to this position where I validate myself. Even last night, I was in a club, and I really don't understand, but people huddle around the 90s bashment all the way. Hey, Margaret, if you got any good links, a good mix on YouTube, send it my way. I was listening to a boom one today. I'm going to send it to you too. But what I would say is self-validation it takes a lot. Yesterday I was at a club, and as usual, people are all huddled around the sides. There's this beautiful space in the middle of the dance floor, waiting for me to go upon it. And so I did. And I just think to myself, You know, usually by the end of the night, everybody else has swarmed in the middle. And I just think, what is that about? You know, self-validation means I'm not worried about what other people think of me in the room. And actually, it's taken me, you know, it's taken time to get there. We didn't just get there, but this is very important. So you can always test that. You can always test that self-validation means you will stand out from the crowd, and sometimes you'll be alone, you'll be a target. Just as Action Hero Teacher, your cousin will be experiencing that. She's honoring herself. She's validating herself. And so when she moves away from crowd or people pleasing, you know, we don't want her to be ostracized and isolated. So how can we support rather than advise? Because she knows her pain. Wicked on it. Thank you. Enjoyed this, love. My guys, you are most welcome. Like I said, one of the things that I notice about depression and anxiety and stress is that adverse situations happen to us. As I said before, I'm happy to take any questions you have. It's not about the adversity. That is my view. It's not about the adverse situation. The key is about how do we respond to adverse situations. Just like we've got this going on at the moment with, I was going to say coronavirus. How we choose to respond to this adverse situation is of paramount importance. And for people who are panic buying, that is an example of how some people are choosing to respond. I choose to respond in a way where I limit what I listen to. So yes, I'll listen to a news broadcast and then I don't anymore. So I just don't. And you know what? I've realized the news is so powerful that you'll hear what's going on out there anyway, because everybody wants to tell you and everybody wants to update you. So it is really about self-care. But even in this process where I choose to not listen to the news, like, for example, my mother gets very annoyed about that and she thinks that I'm not being responsible, rather than realizing I don't want to be filled with fear. I don't want to be filled with fear. Fear is not good for us. Fear is not good for me. So, you know, when you self-validate, it's a beautiful example of my mum's annoyance that I'm not panicked or I'm not going out and buying loads of toilet rolls. What happens is people judge you because they want you to be like everybody else. They want you to be panicked. You know, they want you to be like scared. And then when you're not, they have an issue with that. They say, oh, you're not taking it seriously or this, that, the other. Actually, no, what I'm doing is I'm exercising my choice because I do not want to be filled with fear. I'm a person of faith. I'm a person of love. So let me come from that stance rather than be driven into panic. Yeah, self-validation often means you will be judged. And if we're not robust in that process, it can lead us to concede and go back. But my encouragement, as I say to anybody I'm working with, you know, when the therapy starts to work, that's when you're going to get the kickback from people like, oh, you've changed. You're not how you used to be. You didn't, you know, when that happens, your therapy is working. Loving the self-validation part of this, but very, very true, but difficult at times. Yes, most definitely, Fifi. What makes that tricky, as I said before, is people's judgments of you. But as you grow in it, as you keep honoring it, and I would encourage you, make sure you listen to people who are on that wavelength. So one of the people I enjoy listening to is, what's his name? Ralph Smart. I love to listen to Ralph Smart. So that helps me to kind of make sure that, you know, I listen to people that are on the same wavelength. Because out here in the matrix, it is far from easy, and self-validation is the ultimate way to go. So I just want to thank you all for your questions. I go live again tomorrow. I'm going live every day this week because I want to get and understand what is going on for the people rather than thinking I know what it is, but actually I want to hear from you. So I thank you very much. If you've got any questions or queries, please inbox me. One of the ways to overcome mental health problems is to make our pain purposeful. How can we make our pain purposeful? And if you're interested, my course starts next week where we go online. It's just 4 weeks where we look at how to make your pain purposeful, because we don't want people taking our greatness. Come on now. Come on now. It's all about becoming your best self and truly living your best life. We don't want to fake that. So take care of you, because if you don't,